Right, so I am Ian. I'm a designer and an accessibility specialist. So following on from Antoine's talk, I'm going to talk a bit more about accessibility in games. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview about what it actually is and why it's important, then give you a few easy tips that you can apply to your own games as well. So I'm going to start with explaining what accessibility is. When I say accessibility, I'm talking about in the same way as an accessible hotel room or an accessible entrance. So I'm talking specifically about disability. So first off, I'm actually going to explain a little bit about what disability actually is. And to do that, I have this guy here to help me. So I'm sure when looking at this picture, people in the room will generally be able to make some kind of a guess about what this guy's disability is, what it is that's actually making him disabled, right? So you might be guessing that he has cerebral palsy. In which case, you'd be right, he does have cerebral palsy, but cerebral palsy isn't actually a disability. Cerebral palsy is a medical condition, and that's a really, really important distinction to make. So what is it then? You might be thinking about him being in a wheelchair, in which case, again, yes, he's in a wheelchair, but a wheelchair isn't a disability either. It's a piece of technology that helps you go about your day. So what disability actually is when a medical condition like cerebral palsy comes up against some kind of a barrier, resulting in difficulty going about a day-to-day task. So in this picture, it's actually the steps. Up until the point that he tried to go into that bar to meet his friends, he was going about his day just fine. And these kind of barriers, whether it's some steps or a shelf that's too high, or using red and green for team colors in a deathmatch, these are often things that designers have actually designed to be that way. It's designed like that by another person. So it's kind of a bit of a heavy thing to get your head around, that as designers, as developers, we actually cause people to be disabled. But there is the flip side to it as well, which is that by being aware of the kind of barriers that people come up against, we can actually avoid or remove those barriers and prevent these disabling situations from happening. And there's really important stuff to be thinking about as well. So there's two reasons why it's important. Firstly is the human reason. So what games actually represent is access to recreation, to culture, to socializing, which is stuff that we all kind of take for granted in life, but if for any reason you've got a limited means of accessing those things, all of a sudden games become a really, really powerful contributor to people's quality of life. Then there's the other side, which is simple money. So the numbers involved are pretty staggering. The official UK government statistic is actually 18% of the population who have got some kind of impairment. And looking specifically at games, PopCap did some research into their own demographics, and they actually found 20%. Disability is actually even more prevalent amongst gamers than the rest of the population. Of course, that's only talking about what's generally regarded as coming under that banner. It doesn't actually include the really, really common things like colour blindness, which affects 8% of males, or difficulty reading, which actually affects 14% of adults in the UK. So real big swathes of audience we're talking about. And if you think about accessibility early enough in the development process, there's a lot that you can do really, really easily and cheaply. So there's a big business case to answer. So that's a bit about accessibility and why it's important. I'm just going to give you a couple of quick examples now of the kind of things that are involved. So there's only really 4 different areas to think about in accessibility. It's barriers that relate to your ability to see, to hear, to understand, and to operate a controller. So the first one of those I'm going to talk about is vision. So Antoine already mentioned a bit about screen readers, which is really cool technology you get on mobiles. Basically, any Android or iPhone, you just flick a switch, it changes how all the gestures work. So if you're blind, you can just run your finger over the surface of the phone, and it will actually speak out all the labels. So blind people can actually see the interface. So that's not actually what I'm here to talk about, though. If you want to learn more about that, just speak to me afterwards. There's some really, really cool stuff that you can do with blindness. I'm actually going to talk about vision impairment in general. So most people who've got some difficulty seeing is just that, difficulty seeing. People aren't blind. It's stuff like short-sightedness, long-sightedness, astigmatism, cataract, all these kind of things where you can see, but it's just a bit more difficult. Then, of course, there's situational things as well. It's not actually a physical impairment, but you might, for example, be playing in direct sunlight or on a device that's got a particularly small screen. So for all of these different impairments, these different situations, it all comes down to just two things really, which is size and contrast. So to illustrate this, I've got a game here called Epic Eric. So the developer's actually in the room. I'm sure he's going to be overjoyed to hear me say that this is a perfect example of what not to do. So you can see here, once this is scaled down to a mobile screen, all the stuff on the screen is actually going to be really small. And it's also not very good contrast either. It's quite difficult to distinguish what you're actually meant to be pressing on. But this was just an early mock-up. As the game development progressed, it changed, and this is how it ended up. Oh, sorry. Actually, this is an example first of even a minor vision impairment. You can see it gets even more difficult again. So this is how it ended up. As you can see the difference. Everything is much bigger, much clearer. In particular, it's really, really easy to see which bits you're meant to be interacting with versus the background. So this is the kind of thing that you want to be aiming towards. And the developer actually took it a step further again. So this next feature took 1 hour of development time. So you can see the slider at the top there. Basically all there is a layer inserted between the foreground and the background that you can tint all the way to black, all the way to white, and customize the contrast. So this is really kind of the pinnacle. You don't see this in very many games. But even if you just take care of the basics, make sure you've got decent size, decent contrast, then hugely more number of players will be able to have an enjoyable experience with your game. So next up, hearing. So obviously, hearing loss. The area of hearing accessibility that I'm going to talk about is subtitles. And subtitles are something that are used by huge, huge numbers of gamers. Not just people with hearing loss, but all kinds of other reasons too. So you get people who are playing on mute because they don't want to wake up the baby sleeping. And particularly on mobiles as well, you've got people who are on public transport without their headphones. All kinds of reasons why people use subtitles. Or if you've got a cheap 50-quid tablet with tinny speakers, all kinds of reasons. So with all these reasons, it's not really surprising to see data like this. So subtitles are hugely, hugely important, used by so many players, which is why it's such a shame that they are done so badly. It is so, so rare to see a game that has actually done subtitles well. So that's obviously quite a bold claim. I'll give you a bit of evidence to back it up. I'm going to show you a few quotes from a thread that went up on NeoGAF just last week. Now these quotes are just from page 1 of that thread. So you can get the general gist, right? Gamers aren't very happy about the state of subtitles in games. Now, the kind of things that people have problems with, sometimes it's about the pacing, sometimes it's about the choice of font. But there's two things above all else that people complain about. It's not being able to see the font against the background, and it's also the size of the font that you used. So this is an example of what you should be aiming for. This is some good practice, a game called Bertram Fiddle. And they actually had a developer with impaired vision on the team, which is why they've done such a good job of it. You can see they've got a simple, clear, easy-to-read font. You can see the black behind it, really clearly separated from the background. This is what to aim for. On top of these basics, though, there are other things you can do as well. So you can add additional subtitles in to communicate important background sounds, or who's currently speaking. Something else that's worth considering if you really want to take it to the next level is some options. So looking at this, there's actually a couple of different use cases for why people use subtitles. Some people don't have sound, and they're relying on understanding every single word. Other people only glance at them occasionally, so they want their subtitles to be quite unobtrusive when they're not using them. So actually, each one of these, there are gamers who would actually prefer each individual one of those. So if you could offer some kind of a setting, even just the basic one. So if you look at the top and the second one, that black box around it is called letterboxing. If you just offer the toggle to turn letterboxing on or off, that would make so many people happy. And actually, if you're doing this on mobile, both iOS and Android have actually got device-wide preferences for this. If you go into your accessibility settings on your phone, and they also have APIs. So as a developer, you can read what that person's preferences are, whether or not they want subtitles, how they want them presented, and actually put that straight into your game. So last of all, I'm going to talk about motor accessibility. So this is your ability to operate a controller. And this is what really separates a mobile from other platforms, is the exclusive use of a touchscreen. And it's really, really easy as a developer to fall into the trap of thinking that if somebody has got a mobile, they must be able to do all the mobile-y kind of things. You know, they can do multi-touch gestures, they can use the gyroscope, they can change it from landscape to portrait. Actually, that's not the case. So this is a really common setup. People who've got a tablet mounted in a fixed position on their wheelchair. So see this guy, he can use the touchscreen fine, but he can't use the gyroscope, he can't change the orientation. Or a step further again. So this guy with his head pointer, he's not going to be pressing many buttons simultaneously. You might think, you know, are these people really going to be playing games? Actually, it's the other way around. If you've got these kind of conditions, you're actually more likely to want to play games. And then, of course, again, you've got the situational things. So classic, we're in London, being crammed up on the underground with your face in someone's armpit, one hand on the handrail, playing one-handed. So what can you do about this kind of stuff? The first thing is about avoiding unnecessary complexity. So I mean, comparing it to consoles, you know, if you've got a controller with 18 buttons on, you don't have to use every single one. Same thing in games. I mean, the key is the word unnecessary. If a game really does require 5 fingers to be on the screen at once, that's fine. But it's always worth thinking about whether or not that is actually necessary. Could it be simplified? And the other side of it is offering players some kind of flexibility in how they control the game. And that could equate to a few different things. So it might mean something like this, which is Zenonia, where players can go into the settings and actually move around the on-screen interface. Particularly important for a game like Zenonia, where it's a role-playing gameplay for a long time, hitting things frequently. It might mean something like Need for Speed. So you can see on here, players have got the entire left-hand side of the screen to do their steering on. Press anywhere, that's fine. And I actually spoke to someone a couple of weeks ago who has got very, very limited range of motion. The only games he can play are tablet games. The only way he can hold a tablet is to lie on his back, propped it on his stomach, holding it at the top. So games like Need for Speed are actually the only games he can play because they allow him to have it, to control it along the top instead of the bottom. Or it could mean something else again. So this is a game that I really like. This is a nice, it's called Into the Dead. I don't know if anyone's played this before. It's basically a 3D endless runner into the screen with guns and with zombies. So what they did was offer a few different control schemes. Now actually for most of development, only that first one, only the tilt controls are present. That's how the game is intended to be played. They only actually added in the extra ones at the end for the reasons of accessibility. But of course, you know, they played it a lot. They knew that the tilt was the most fun, that everyone would want to play that. They weren't really expecting anyone would use those other ones. But they actually tracked the data. That's something I encourage everyone to do. Track data in this kind of stuff and share it. Other people find it really valuable. They tracked the data, and actually they found that almost exactly 25% of players used each one of those options. Now, they're expecting like 90% to use tilt, but actually 25% across all of them. So what they managed to achieve is, through offering these other options, not just opening it up to people who can't use tilt, they actually made the game a more enjoyable experience for the 75% of players who actually prefer the other methods. So that's just a real whistle-stop tour of a couple of the kind of things you consider. I'd really recommend checking out this website. It's got lots of other nice examples of there, things like colour blindness and dyslexia. But I just want to finish up with a quick show of hands. So a quick question, how many of the people in this room are planning on giving up playing games by the time they reach the age of 65? No. I was hoping they was going to put their hand up. So actually when you hit 65, that is the age at which you cross the 50% point of likelihood of having some kind of impairment. So if you think about this stuff, not only are you going to increase your bottom line, not only are you going to improve people's quality of life, but you're actually putting design principles in place now that will allow you yourself to play games in years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think your point, about the nature of this kind of approach, not just helping people get access to games that they couldn't otherwise play, but also helping people who can access it enjoy it in more depth. Yeah. I think it's incredibly important. And it's, to me, there's another aspect to it, which is that if you prevent, effectively by inaction, prevent people playing who have a disability, you're not just preventing them, you're preventing the resonant effect that happens when an audience happens to play. So you're now basically cutting off people from the potential of playing. And in this era where it's so difficult to find a discovery, that, for me, seems like a very stupid thing to do.
Yeah, discovery, absolutely. That's one in particular. If you are doing this kind of stuff, talk about it. Talk about it in feature listings, free SEO juice, all kinds of good stuff.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Thank you.